French intelligence service DGSE agents in Burkina Faso hadn't slept for 72 hours, because what was happening in the capital Ouagadougou had the power to destroy France's 60-year colonial system overnight. The classified documents on Ibrahim Traoré's desk showed that this $15 billion deal was just the beginning. But no one knows what happened during those 72 hours. No one heard what was discussed in that midnight phone call from Xi Jinping. And no one understands why an emergency meeting was called at the Pentagon after this deal was signed. This is the true story of what happened during the 72 hours that changed Africa's destiny. And after you learn this story, your perspective on world politics will never be the same. Because what happened during those 72 hours didn't just change Burkina Faso, it transformed the entire African continent. And behind this transformation were secret operations, midnight phone calls, and life-changing decisions that no one knew about. Ouagadougou, March 15, 2024, 11:45 p.m. The capital of Burkina Faso was enveloped in the silence of the night. Only security forces and a few late-night shops remained lit on the streets. But behind this deceptive silence, events that would change Africa's destiny were about to begin. Ibrahim Traoré was alone in his private study at the presidential palace. He had finished his last meeting of the day and was organizing his documents when the red phone on his desk rang quietly. This phone was only used for the highest-level security situations. As Traoré wondered who could be calling, he picked up the receiver. "President Traoré, this is Security Chief Caboret speaking. We have an urgent situation. French intelligence service DGSE agents have been unusually monitoring the palace for the past 48 hours. Also, there are encrypted messages from Beijing, from the highest levels of the Chinese government." Traoré's heart raced. There had been important developments in recent days regarding secret contacts with China, but such intense surveillance indicated a major development. "Caboret, what is the content of the messages from China?" "Mr. President, the messages are encrypted, but from what we understand, a very important meeting with you is planned for tomorrow. The subject is Africa's largest investment project." Traoré began to think, looking out the window. For months, he had been seeking new partnerships to evaluate Burkina Faso's natural resources more fairly. France's colonial-like system, which had lasted for 60 years, was not lifting the country out of poverty. China's investments in Africa were steadily increasing, and other countries were achieving serious development. "Caboret, my first task tomorrow morning will be to evaluate these messages. Increase security measures, especially monitor the movements of French agents closely." After hanging up, Traoré got up from his desk and walked to the large world map in the room. Trade volume between Burkina Faso and China had increased by 300% in the last 2 years. But what was really important was the quality of agreements China made with African countries. Technology transfer, employment guarantees, fair partnership terms. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, French agent Marcus Dubois and his team were continuing their night shift. Dubois was a 38-year-old man with black hair and medium height. He had spent the last 15 years in Africa, participating in countless secret operations to protect French interests. But the situation he now faced was the most critical moment of his career. Dubois opened his radio to communicate with headquarters in Paris. "Control, this is Ouagadougou Point. I request a status report." The voice from Paris belonged to his superior Jean-Pierre Mercier, whom Dubois knew well. Mercier had been managing African operations for 25 years and was a very experienced agent. "Marcus, do you understand the seriousness of the situation? China's investments in Africa are out of control. A major move is being prepared in Burkina Faso. Your mission is to find out what this move is and, if possible, prevent it." Dubois understood the difficulty of the situation. Understood control, but Traoré's circle is very tight. Security at the palace is at maximum level. Getting information won't be easy. "Marcus, France's 60-year presence in Africa is in danger. If we can't succeed in this operation, we can't prevent China from dominating Africa. Use risky methods if necessary." Mercier's voice was tense and determined, because he also knew that China's investments in Africa were increasing exponentially. In 2023 alone, China's investment in Africa reached $85 billion. France's traditional influence was rapidly declining. As Dubois closed the radio, a plan began to form in his mind. He knew the palace security system very well. There were several elements working in Traoré's security team who sold information for money. At this critical period, it was time to activate those elements. Meanwhile, Intense activity was also being carried out at China's embassy in Burkina Faso. Ambassador Chen Wei, after receiving instructions from Beijing, knew he would spend the night in preparation. Tomorrow, the foundations of China's largest investment project in Africa would be laid. Chen Wei was a 45-year-old experienced ambassador who had spent most of his diplomatic career in Africa. He had played important roles in shaping China's Africa policy. The task he now faced was the most important moment of his career. The ambassador called Beijing on his private line. "Control, this is Ouagadougou. Everything is ready for tomorrow. President Traoré is very warm to the project, but French agent activity has increased. We need to be careful." The response from Beijing came from Li Huang, special advisor to Foreign Minister Wang Yi. "Chen Wei, this project will be China's largest investment in Africa. Failure is unacceptable. If necessary, we can send a special security team. Thank you, Li Huang. The situation is under control for now, but I will closely monitor the development of the situation." After hanging up, Chen Wei began to examine the classified files on his desk. This project, called Golden Bridge, had the potential to make Burkina Faso one of Africa's most developed countries. The $15 billion investment would have not only economic but also geopolitical consequences. The project consisted of three main components. First, infrastructure revolution. Modern highways, railway network, airports, and port facilities throughout the country. This infrastructure would transform Burkina Faso into the region's trade center. Second, energy independence. Electricity generation from solar and wind energy, modern grid system, and energy storage facilities. This way, the country would become completely independent in terms of energy. Third, industrial transformation. Modern factories for processing gold, uranium, and other natural resources. Instead of raw material exports, processed product exports would be made. When this project was completed, Burkina Faso's economy would grow 4 times in 5 years. Per capita income would triple the African average. The unemployment rate would fall below 5%. But the most important feature of the project was China's conditions. Instead of the traditional debt trap, a fair partnership model was adopted. Only 30% partnership in Burkina Faso's natural resources was requested. In return, full technology transfer and employment guarantee were given. Chen Wei knew that this project would set an example for other African countries. If successful, China's influence in Africa would increase exponentially. France's 60-year hegemony would come to an end. 2:30, Traoré was still awake. In his mind, he was setting up scenarios for tomorrow's meetings. China's such a large offer probably contained very serious conditions. But if these conditions were in line with Burkina Faso's interests, a deal that would change the country's destiny could be made. In Traoré's mind were Thomas Sankara's words, "Independence must be not only political but also economic. A country cannot be truly independent without controlling its own resources." After Sankara's tragic death in 1987, Burkina Faso's natural resources continued to remain under the control of foreign companies. Only 20% of the revenue from gold mines remained in the country. 80% of the revenue from uranium exports went to foreign companies. Traoré had come to power to change this situation. China's offer could be a historic opportunity to achieve this change. March 16, 2024, 8 a.m. Traoré arrived at his office early as usual. On his desk were encrypted messages that had arrived during the night. The most important was a message from Chinese President Xi Jinping's private office. The message was brief but very clear. "Dear President Traoré, I would like to have a private meeting with you today at 10 a.m. The subject is a project that will change Burkina Faso's future, with absolute secrecy." Understanding the importance of this message, Traoré immediately called Security Chief Caboret. Caboret was a 42-year-old experienced officer who had spent the last 8 years in Traoré's security team. His loyalty to Traoré was unquestionable. "Caboret, I will have a private meeting with the Chinese president. Security at the palace must be at maximum level. Especially ensure that French agents get no information." Caboret understood the seriousness of the situation. "Mr. President, French agents have been more active for the past 48 hours. There are suspicious movements around the palace. Let me take special measures. Of course. Also, no personnel should be in the palace during this meeting. Only you and me." At 9:45 a.m., Traoré was waiting ready in the special security room. This room was specially protected against external eavesdropping. Its walls were covered with special materials, preventing any electronic eavesdropping attempts. At exactly 10 a.m., the private line rang. Traoré took a deep breath and answered the phone. President Xi, there must be a special reason for calling at such an early hour. Xi Jinping's voice was determined and clear. President Traoré, I want to make you a very important offer. But first, I want to make sure that our conversation will remain in absolute secrecy. Of course, President Xi. All necessary security measures have been taken. Perfect. President Traoré, as China, we want to make a $15 billion investment in Burkina Faso. This investment will make your country one of Africa's most developed countries within 5 years. Traoré's heart raced. $15 billion was approximately 4 times Burkina Faso's annual budget. This figure was large enough to completely transform the country's economy. President Xi, this is a very generous offer. But what are the conditions for this investment? President Traoré, our conditions are very simple. We only want 30% partnership in Burkina Faso's natural resources. In return, we will provide full technology transfer and employment guarantee. Production facilities will be entirely on your territory. Traoré found these conditions unexpected. Traditional foreign investors demanded much heavier conditions. China's offer seemed really very attractive. President Xi, this offer is really very interesting. But how can I learn the details of this project? President Traoré, my special representatives will be in Ouagadougou in 4 hours. They will present all the details of the project to you. But I want to emphasize this point. This project must be conducted in absolute secrecy. Especially Western powers must not be aware of this. Traoré understood the importance of this emphasis. China's investments in Africa were being met with concern by Western powers. Especially France did not want to lose its traditional influence in Africa. I understand, President Xi. Necessary secrecy measures will be taken. I am waiting for your representatives. President Traoré, this project is very important not only for Burkina Faso but for all of Africa. If successful, other countries will also want similar agreements. It will be a historic step for Africa's economic independence. After the phone call ended, Traoré leaned back in his chair. Thousands of thoughts were spinning in his mind. Could this agreement really change Burkina Faso's destiny? Did China have a secret agenda? What would France's reaction be? But one thing was certain, this opportunity might never come again. The chance to use Burkina Faso's natural wealth for the benefit of its own people. Meanwhile, French agent Dubois's surveillance around the palace continued. Dubois was reporting the unusual security measures he observed early in the morning to Paris. Control, there's a maximum security alert at the palace. Certain that Traoré had a very important meeting, probably related to China. Mercier's response from Paris came, Marcus, you must find out the content of this meeting. If necessary, use our sources inside the palace. After receiving this instruction, Dubois sent a message to double agent Nicolas Compere in the palace security team. Compere had provided valuable information to Dubois for the past 5 years. In return, he had achieved a good living standard for his family. Nicolas, what's happening at the palace today? A very important meeting took place. You need to learn the details. After receiving this message, Nicolas began to investigate carefully. He examined the palace security records. He learned that Traoré had stayed in the special security room for about 30 minutes. This duration was sufficient for an important international meeting. In the afternoon, Nicolas gave feedback. Traoré stayed in the special security room for 30 minutes at 10 a.m. He didn't have any face-to-face meetings. Probably a very important phone call. After receiving this information, Dubois sent an urgent report to Paris. Control, Traoré had a very important phone call this morning, probably with China's top level. The seriousness of the situation is increasing. Mercier's response was immediate. Marcus, whatever China's move is, it must be prevented. It's critical for France's interests in Africa. 2 p.m. A special plane was waiting on the runway at Ouagadougou Airport. This was the People's Republic of China's special diplomatic aircraft. A 3-person delegation disembarked from the plane. Leading was Wang Yifei, China's special representative for African affairs. Wang was a 48-year-old experienced diplomat who had spent the last 15 years in Africa. He coordinated the African leg of China's Belt and Road Project. The second person was Li Huang, International Projects Director at China Development Bank. Li was a 44-year-old technocrat with a PhD in economics an expert in China's overseas investments. The third person was Zhang Wei, head of the Africa desk at China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Zhang was a 40-year-old career diplomat, an expert in diplomatic protocol and international law. The delegation was met at the airport by Ambassador Chen Wei. Chen Wei knew the importance of the delegation. This project would be China's largest single investment project in Africa. Mr. Wang, how was the flight? Chen Wei asked. Wang Yifei looked tired but determined. Chen Wei, the flight was fine, but what's really important is the success of this project. Are we ready to meet with President Traoré? Of course. The palace is ready for the meeting, but we need to be careful. French agents are very active. Li Huang interjected, this project will be China's largest investment in Africa. Failure is unacceptable. We've made all necessary preparations. Zhang Wei evaluated the situation from a diplomatic perspective. We need to be prepared for international reactions. We know that France will give harsh reactions especially. The journey from the airport to the palace was made with a special security convoy escort. Burkina Faso security forces had taken special measures to ensure the convoy's safety. Du Bois was monitoring this convoy from a distance. Observing Chinese-plated vehicles heading to the palace, he sent an urgent report to Paris. Control, a special delegation from China went to the palace. 3-person delegation, highest level. The situation became very serious. Mercier's response was harsh and clear. Marcus, you must find out what this delegation will propose. If necessary, take risks. At 3 p.m., the Chinese delegation met with Traoré in the palace's special meeting room. The room was specially protected against external eavesdropping. Only Traoré and Security Chief Cabaret were present. Traoré greeted the delegation warmly. Mr. Wang, welcome. After President Xi's message, I was eagerly waiting for this meeting. Wang Yifei responded sincerely, President Traoré, this meeting is very important not only for Burkina Faso but for all of Africa. We want to share the Golden Bridge project with you. Li Huang prepared a presentation on a tablet. Mr. President, this project consists of 3 main components. If you permit, I would like to present the details. Traoré began to listen with interest. Li Huang started a professional presentation. First component, infrastructure revolution. Modern highway network connecting all major cities of Burkina Faso. A total of 2,500 kilometers of roads will be built. High-speed train line between Ouagadougou-Bobo-Dioulasso. New international airport and cargo terminal. Second component, energy independence. Solar power plants to meet 70% of the country's needs. 30% electricity generation from wind energy. Modern grid system and energy storage facilities. Third component, industrial transformation. Gold processing facilities. Uranium enrichment factory. Modern facilities for processing agricultural products. Traoré was trying to understand the magnitude of these projects. Mr. Li, what is the total cost of these projects? Li Huang smiled and replied, Mr. President, a total of $15 billion. It will take 5 years. When completed, Burkina Faso's economy will grow 4 times. This figure impressed Traoré, but the question in his mind was, so, what are the conditions China wants in return? Wang Yifei was expecting this question. President Traoré, our conditions are very simple and fair. We only want 30% partnership in Burkina Faso's natural resources. In return, full technology transfer will be made. Employment guarantee will be given. Production facilities will be entirely on your territory. Traoré compared these conditions with current foreign investors. French companies wanted 70 to 80% partnership. They didn't do technology transfer. They didn't give employment guarantees. Production facilities were mostly established in France. Mr. Wang, these conditions seem really very fair, but how can I evaluate the details of this project? Zhang Wei explained the situation from a diplomatic perspective. Mr. President, the legal infrastructure of this project is ready, fully compliant with international law. Implementation will begin immediately after the agreement is signed. Traoré began to calculate in his mind. This agreement could change Burkina Faso's destiny, but he needed to consult with his advisors for such a big decision. Mr. Wang, this offer is really very valuable, but I need to discuss such an important matter with my close advisors. Wang Yifei was expecting this reaction. Of course, Mr. President, but I want to draw attention to this point. This project must be conducted in absolute secrecy. Especially Western powers must not be aware of this. Why is such secrecy necessary? Li Huang explained the situation from an economic perspective. Mr. President, China's investments in Africa are increasing Western powers' concerns. Especially France doesn't want to lose its traditional influence in Africa. If this project is announced beforehand, there may be various obstruction attempts. Traoré understood these concerns. France's interventions in Africa had occurred many times in history. Especially economic independence efforts were prevented by various methods. I understand. Necessary secrecy measures will be taken. Tomorrow morning, I will give my final decision. Wang Yifei found this answer satisfactory. Perfect, President Traoré. We will be here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. After the Chinese delegation left the palace, Traoré called an urgent meeting. He called only his three most trusted advisors, Economy Minister Amadou Cabaret, Foreign Minister Mariam Ouedraogo, and Defense Minister Issoufou Zaïre. 7:00 p.m., they gathered in the private meeting room. Traoré explained the details of China's offer. The advisor's reaction was positive but cautious. Economy Minister Amadou Cabaret was a 46-year-old experienced technocrat who had done his economics doctorate in Paris and played important roles in shaping Burkina Faso's economic policies. Mr. President, said Cabaret, this offer is very attractive economically. Currently, our country's annual budget is $4 billion. A $15 billion investment will completely transform the economy. Cabaret showed his calculations. If this investment is realized, within 5 years, per capita income will increase 4 times, unemployment rate will drop to 3%, export revenue will increase 6 times, technology level will advance 20 years. Foreign Minister Mariam Ouedraogo was a 42-year-old experienced diplomat, an expert in international relations, experienced in managing Burkina Faso's foreign policy. Mr. President, said Ouedraogo, we need to evaluate the international dimensions of this agreement. China's investments in Africa are rapidly increasing. This project will make Burkina Faso a leading country in this trend. Ouedraogo presented a geopolitical analysis, but France's reaction will be very harsh. In the last 60 years, they won't want to lose their influence over Burkina Faso. They may apply economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, even harsher measures. Defense Minister Issoufou Zaïre was a 51-year-old experienced officer who had spent most of his military career in the Burkina Faso army, an expert in security matters. Mr. President, said Zaïre, we need to evaluate the situation from a security perspective. This agreement will make Burkina Faso a geopolitical target. There's especially a risk of French intelligence service intervention. Zaïre listed the security risks: sabotage operations, economic destabilization, even coup attempt risk. We must take necessary security measures. Traoré evaluated the situation, understanding his advisor's concerns. Friends, this opportunity may never come again. The chance to use Burkina Faso's natural wealth for the benefit of our own people. Amadou's economic calculations are very clear. This agreement will make our country one of Africa's most developed countries. Mariam's geopolitical concerns are also realistic, but this is the price to pay for independence. Issoufou's security recommendations will be taken into account. Necessary measures will be taken. The meeting ended at 10 p.m. Traoré had made his decision. He would accept China's offer. But before making this decision, he had one last meeting to make. At midnight, he called retired General Moussa Traoré, a close friend of Thomas Sankara and an important figure in the revolutionary movement, on his private line. General Traoré, I had to call at such a late hour. I want to discuss a very important matter. Retired General Moussa Traoré was a 68-year-old man who had been sent into exile after Sankara's murder in 1987, had returned to the country in recent years, and had become one of Traoré's advisors. President Traoré, I understand how important a matter this is. I'm listening. Traoré explained China's offer in detail. General Mousa's reaction was very clear. President Traoré, this was Thomas Sankara's dream, using Burkina Faso's natural resources for the benefit of our own people. This opportunity must not be missed. But General, the risks are also very big. France's reaction will be very harsh. President Traoré, Taking risks is essential for independence. Sankara also took the same risks. The difference is that we are prepared this time. General Mao's words reinforced Traoré's decision. The next morning, he would accept China's offer. Meanwhile, French agent Dubois's surveillance operation continued. He had reported to Paris that the Chinese delegation had stayed at the palace for 4 hours and that a very important meeting had taken place. Mercier's instruction was clear. Marcus, you must find out the result of this meeting. Tomorrow morning, the Chinese delegation will be at the palace again. This time, you must learn the content of the meeting. Dubois gave double agent Nicholas Compare a special task. Nicholas, you must find out what will happen at the palace tomorrow morning. If necessary, use listening devices. Nicholas found this request risky but accepted it for money. He decided to place a listening device near the Chinese delegation's meeting room the next morning. March 17, 2024, 9 a.m. Traoré was making his final preparations before the meeting with the Chinese delegation. He had made his decision. He would accept China's offer. At 10 a.m., the Chinese delegation met with Traoré in the palace's special meeting room. This time, Economy Minister Amadou Cabaret was also with Traoré. Wang Yifei was curious about Traoré's decision. Mr. President, did you have a chance to evaluate our offer? Traoré answered decisively, Mr. Wang, we accept your offer, but we also have some conditions. Wang Yifei was expecting this answer. Of course, President Traoré, let's hear your conditions. Traoré presented his prepared list. First condition, the project will be completed without delay within 5 years. No delays are acceptable. Second condition, 80% of Burkina Faso citizens will work in the projects. Only high-level technical personnel will come from China. Third condition, technology transfer will be 100% realized. All technical knowledge will remain in Burkina Faso. Fourth condition, the agreement will be signed within 72 hours to minimize the risk of leaks. Fifth condition, China will fully respect Burkina Faso's sovereignty rights. There will be no interference in internal affairs. Wang Yifei found these conditions reasonable. Mr. President, we accept all your conditions. The agreement text can be prepared. Li Huang presented the agreement draft he had prepared. Mr. President, we have prepared the main articles of the agreement. We request your review. The main articles of the agreement were Article 1, total $15 billion investment will last 5 years. Article 2, 3 main components, infrastructure, energy, and industry. Article 3, China 30%, Burkina Faso 70% partnership. Article 4, full technology transfer and employment guarantee. Article 5, production facilities will be established entirely in Burkina Faso. Economy Minister Cabaret carefully reviewed the agreement text. Mr. President, the agreement text is in accordance with our conditions. I recommend signing. Traoré knew the historic importance of this agreement. Mr. Wang, this agreement will be an example not only for our countries, but for all of Africa. Wang Yifei agreed with this view. You're right, President Traoré. This agreement will be an important step for Africa's economic independence. After final corrections were made to the agreement text, they proceeded to the signing ceremony. Traoré and Wang Yifei signed the document, formalizing the agreement that would change Africa's destiny. After the signing ceremony, Wang Yifei conveyed a special message. President Traoré, there's a special message from President Xi Jinping. This agreement is the beginning of a new era in China-Africa relations. Traoré received this message with appreciation. Mr. Wang, I hope this agreement will be beneficial for both our countries. After the signing ceremony, the Chinese delegation left Ouagadougou. Now, the $15 billion Golden Bridge project had officially begun. Meanwhile, French agent Nicholas Compare's eavesdropping attempt had been partially successful. He had learned that the agreement was signed and conveyed this information to Dubois. After receiving this information, Dubois sent an urgent report to Paris. Control, the agreement has been signed. China will make a $15 billion investment in Burkina Faso. The situation is critical. Mercier's reaction was very harsh. Marcus, this agreement means disaster for France's interests in Africa. An action plan must be prepared immediately. March 18, 2024, 8 a.m. China's state news agency published a news that attracted the world's attention. The $15 billion Golden Bridge Agreement has been signed between China and Burkina Faso. This agreement is China's largest single investment project in Africa. The news had a great impact in the world press. The economic world began to evaluate the effects of this agreement. In Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron called an emergency meeting. Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna, Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu, and Intelligence Chief Bernard Barbier attended the meeting. Macron spoke, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. This agreement threatens France's 60-year influence in Africa. Countermeasures must be taken immediately. Colonna evaluated the diplomatic dimension. Mr. President, Burkina Faso's this move will affect other African countries too, can create a domino effect. Lecornu analyzed the situation from a security perspective. China's military presence in Africa is increasing. This agreement will change the security balances in the region. Barbier presented the intelligence report. Mr. President, the preparation of this agreement was done very secretly. Our agents could learn it at the last moment. Macron determined the counter-strategies. Economic pressure will be applied to Burkina Faso. Diplomatic isolation will be created. If necessary, security measures will be taken. In London, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak held a similar meeting. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and Intelligence Chief Sir Richard Moore attended the meeting. Sunak evaluated the situation. This move by China in Africa threatens Western interests. We must give a coordinated response. Cleverly determined diplomatic strategies. We must warn other African countries about China's debt trap. We must offer alternative investment packages. Moore presented intelligence analysis. China's total investment in Africa has exceeded $200 billion. This agreement will exponentially increase China's influence in Africa. In Washington, U.S. President Joe Biden held a National Security Council meeting. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and CIA Director William Burns attended the meeting. Biden emphasized the strategic importance of the situation. This agreement strengthens China's influence in Africa. We must review America's Africa strategy. Blinken explained the diplomatic dimension. Mr. President, African countries find China's investments attractive. We must also offer competitive alternatives. Austin evaluated the situation from a security perspective. China's military presence in Africa is increasing. This agreement will change the security balances in the region. Burns presented intelligence analysis. China is conducting a systematic influence operation in Africa. This agreement is the most important part of this operation. In Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin also evaluated the situation. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov attended the meeting. Putin appreciated China's success. China is pursuing a very successful strategy in Africa. We must also strengthen our relations with African countries. Lavrov evaluated diplomatic opportunities. Mr. President, Western influence in Africa is decreasing. We should also evaluate this opportunity. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré addressed the people. Thousands of people had gathered in front of the presidential palace. Traoré made an enthusiastic speech. Dear citizens, the agreement we signed yesterday has opened a new page in our country's history. Now poverty, underdevelopment, and dependency are left behind. We have a bright future ahead of us. The crowd was applauding Traoré's every sentence. They were shouting independence, development, China-Burkina friendship. Traoré concluded his speech with these words. This agreement is a beacon of hope not only for Burkina Faso but for all of Africa. We succeeded, other brother countries will also succeed. 72 hours after the agreement was signed, its effects began to be felt worldwide. In Burkina Faso, economic indicators were changing positively. The stock market increased by 300%. Foreign investors began to flow to the country. The construction sector revived. The unemployment rate began to decrease. In Africa, interest in similar agreements increased. The president of Mali requested a meeting with China. Niger began to review existing French agreements. Ghana requested infrastructure investment from China. In the world, power balances began to change. China's influence in Africa increased exponentially. France's traditional hegemony was shaken. America began to develop a new strategy towards Africa. Traoré said in his evaluation 72 hours later, this agreement is a very important step for Africa's economic independence. Now African countries have the opportunity to evaluate their own resources on their own terms. Today, 6 months have passed since that agreement. The Golden Bridge project is progressing rapidly. Burkina Faso has become Africa's fastest-growing economy. China's investments in Africa have tripled. France's influence has decreased. America has developed new policies towards Africa. But most importantly, African countries have now started to act more boldly about economic independence. What happened in those 72 hours continues to shape the continent's future. French agents hadn't slept for 72 hours, but staying awake didn't help, because history was being written in the palace in Ouagadougou those days, and Africa had started to determine its own destiny. This wasn't just the story of a $15 billion agreement. It was the true story of Africa's independence. The story of destiny changed in 72 hours, bold decisions, and new hopes. And this story was just beginning.